My neighbor's kindness healed wounds. My husband ignored for years. True betrayal story. Today, I have a story that's not just about betrayal, it's about what happens when someone unexpected sees the pain that the one who promised to never hurt you has long ignored. For years, I smiled through the silence, swallowed my sadness, and told myself that things would get better, but they didn't. And while my husband drifted further away, it was my neighbor, kind, gentle, and unexpectedly attentive, who noticed what he never did. He didn't touch me, he didn't make promises, he simply listened, and in that quiet, something inside me began to heal. What happened next challenged everything I thought I believed about loyalty, marriage, and what we deserve when our hearts are breaking. This isn't just a story about a neighbor, it's a story about what it means to be seen again. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts and comments, and subscribe for more amazing stories. I always believed that marriage was supposed to heal, to protect, to cherish. But years passed and my heart quietly broke piece by piece. Under the weight of being ignored, I never imagined that the man living just next door, a man I barely knew, would notice the cracks my husband refused to see. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into something that touched the deepest parts of me. Something I never thought I would feel again. I used to watch the sunset alone from the kitchen window, a cup of tea cooling between my hands. My husband would be somewhere else, either buried in work or lost in his own world where I no longer existed. We had stopped laughing together, we had stopped sharing dreams. Our home had become a house, cold, silent, and suffocating. It had been years since I felt truly seen. I had convinced myself that this was normal, that marriage eventually faded into a series of routines and responsibilities. But deep down, I longed for more. I longed for someone to look at me and actually see me, not just pass by me like I was part of the furniture. Then came Daniel, the neighbor, who had recently moved into the house next door. He was kind in a way that caught me off guard. Not just polite, but genuinely kind. He remembered small things like how I took my coffee, or the kind of flowers that made me smile. He always greeted me warmly, never rushed, always present. At first, I thought I was imagining things. A simple hello felt different. A brief conversation left me smiling longer than I should have. I scolded myself for feeling butterflies over something so innocent. After all, I was a married woman. Even if my marriage felt like a shadow of what it once was, I still wore the ring. One rainy evening, I struggled to carry groceries from my car to the house. My husband had promised he would help, but he had forgotten. As usual, I stood there soaked and frustrated, trying to juggle the bags. That was when Daniel appeared with an umbrella in one hand and a wide smile on his face. "Let me help you," he said, without waiting for permission. His voice was warm, steady, and it did something to me that I could not explain. We rushed inside, laughing as water dripped everywhere. For a moment, it felt like life had color again. Daniel placed the bags on the counter and turned to me, brushing wet strands of hair from my face without thinking. His fingers lingered just a second too long. I froze. He froze. There was a tension between us, raw and undeniable. "I should go," he said softly, his voice rough around the edges. "Thank you," I whispered, my heart hammering in my chest as he disappeared through the door. That night I lay awake replaying the moment in my head. I hated myself for how much it had meant. I hated how it made me realize what I had been missing for so long. Affection, attention, the feeling of being cherished. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular part of my days. Small interactions away from the driveway, a shared laugh at the mailbox, a warm conversation while pulling weeds in the garden. It was harmless, I told myself. Innocent. But every smile, every glance chipped away at the armor I had built around my heart. I started noticing things I had ignored for years, the way my husband barely acknowledged me when he came home, the way he looked through me instead of at me, the way I had shrunk inside myself, believing that I did not deserve more. Daniel made me feel alive again, and that terrified me. One afternoon, I baked an extra batch of cookies and walked over to Daniel's house, a silly excuse just to see him, to feel that spark again. He opened the door, his smile lighting up his entire face when he saw me standing there. "You did not have to," he said, accepting the cookies. "I wanted to," I replied, my voice smaller than I intended. We stood there in the doorway, an invisible line between us both, knowing that whatever we had was growing into something neither of us could name. When I returned home, my husband was sitting on the couch, glued to his phone. He barely looked up. No questions about where I had been. No curiosity, no care. I realized then that the betrayal had started long before Daniel came into my life. It had started the day my husband stopped seeing me, loving me, choosing me, and for the first time in a very long time, I wondered if I deserved better. The first real crack in my carefully constructed wall came a week later. I had been gardening alone, trying to pull out stubborn weeds while the sun beat down mercilessly. My husband had left early that morning, claiming another long day at work. No offer to help, no kiss goodbye, just silence. I struggled with a particularly nasty root when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, wiping sweat from my forehead, and saw Daniel standing there holding a cold bottle of water. "You looked like you could use this," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness I had almost forgotten existed. I laughed awkwardly and accepted the bottle. Our fingers brushed. A spark jumped between us, so small and fast it could have been imagined, but I knew it was not. "You are always saving me," I said, trying to sound casual but feeling breathless. "Maybe you deserve to be saved," he replied, his words soft but heavy with meaning. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who noticed, who cared, who listened. Everything I had craved for years lived in his simple acts of kindness. The line between us thinned. The excuses I had clung to, loyalty, duty, fear, they started to fall apart. Days passed, and Daniel's presence became a comfort I could not resist. One evening, after another lonely dinner with an absent husband, I found myself sitting on my porch, staring at the stars. Daniel was outside too, his own chair a few feet away, and without a word he joined me. We talked for hours about nothing and everything, about dreams, regrets, the small wounds life leaves behind. He listened like no one ever had. I found myself telling him things I had never admitted even to myself. My husband has not asked me how my day was in years. I confessed, my voice breaking. Daniel's eyes softened. "Then he is a fool," he said simply. The way he looked at me in that moment, full of sadness, understanding, and something deeper, unraveled me. "I feel invisible," I whispered. "You are anything but invisible," he said fiercely, leaning closer. The tension between us was electric, almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of his gaze on my lips, my cheeks, the vulnerable curve of my neck. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered the vows I once made. But all I could feel was the loneliness that had gnawed at me for years, and the way Daniel made that loneliness disappear, even if just for a moment, slowly, cautiously. Daniel reached out and touched my hand. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a tender, questioning gesture. I could have pulled away. I did not. Instead, I let my fingers weave through his, holding on tightly. "I cannot do this," I breathed, my voice trembling. "You deserve to be happy," he whispered back. I closed my eyes. The tears came hot and fast, not just because of him, but because of everything, because of all the nights I had cried myself to sleep without anyone noticing, because of all the years I had convinced myself that I needed nothing more. When I opened my eyes, Daniel was still there, patient, steady, waiting for me to decide. Slowly, almost reverently, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, tentative and soft. He gave me every chance to pull away. I did not. I pressed back the kiss, deepening with a hunger that had been buried for too long. It was not reckless or hurried. It was slow, deliberate, full of 1,000 unsaid words. His hands framed my face, cradling me like something precious, something breakable. In that kiss, I felt everything. The years of neglect, the ache of being unseen, the desperate yearning to be held, to be loved. And Daniel answered it all without speaking a single word. When we finally broke apart, I leaned my forehead against his chest, gasping for breath. My heart pounding so hard I could barely stand. "I have never felt this alive," I whispered. He held me closer. his arms wrapping around me in a way that felt protective, reverent. "You are not wrong for wanting to be loved," he murmured against my hair. I stayed in his arms for what felt like forever, soaking in the feeling of being wanted, needed, adored, no guilt, only clarity. When I finally pulled back, Daniel cupped my face again, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Whatever happens next," he said, "know that you deserve more than the scraps you have been given." The words broke something open inside me. I nodded, unable to speak, and he smiled a sad, knowing smile before gently kissing my forehead. That night I went home and looked at my sleeping husband. I saw the stranger he had become, the indifference he wore like armor. I realized then that I had been mourning a marriage that had died long ago, clinging to the ghost of what once was. Daniel was not the betrayal. The betrayal had already happened. In the long silences, the cold shoulders, the years of emotional starvation, Daniel was the light in the dark, a reminder that I was still worthy of love, of joy, of being seen. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the echoes of Daniel's touch on my skin, the warmth of his kiss lingering on my lips. I knew there would be choices to make, consequences to face, but for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope, real, trembling, terrifying hope, and I was not going to let it slip away again. The days that followed were a mess of guilt, longing, and confusion. I could not focus on anything, not my chores, not my work, not even the conversations that buzzed meaninglessly around me. Everything felt heavy. Every breath, every step, every thought was a battle between what was right and what my heart screamed for. Daniel respected my space. He did not pressure me or push for anything more, but his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, told me that he was waiting, that if I needed him even for a moment, he would be there. It was not just the kiss that haunted me, it was the way he made me feel during it, seen, cherished, understood. Those were things I had been starved of for so long I had almost forgotten how much they mattered. My marriage had taught me to expect so little, to silence my needs, to shrink myself into someone who simply endured. Now, standing at the edge of something real, something terrifyingly beautiful, I did not know how to move forward. I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, smiled politely at my husband when he asked for his coffee, but underneath it all, I was breaking. Every forced smile, every ignored word, every cold glance across the table made me bleed inside. One evening I could not bear it any longer. My husband sat in the living room, eyes glued to his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I stood in the doorway clutching a plate of food and stared at him. "I do not feel loved anymore," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He did not even look up. "You are overthinking again," he muttered. Overthinking. That word shattered me more than any scream could have. I put the plate down and walked out of the room, my heart aching in ways words could not capture. I realized then that it was not just loneliness I had been living with, it was erasure. I no longer existed in his world, I was just there. The ache pushed me towards Daniel like a magnet. I found myself walking across the lawn, trembling as I knocked on his door. He opened it almost instantly, as if he had been waiting on the other side. He did not say anything, he did not need to. He stepped aside, and I entered a space that felt like safety and danger all at once. I sat down heavily on his couch, unable to speak. Tears I had held back for years finally broke free, sliding down my cheeks in silent agony. Daniel sat beside me, close but not touching, waiting for me to find my words. "I do not know who I am anymore," I whispered brokenly. I spent so long trying to be what he needed. I forgot what I needed. Daniel's hand found mine, warm and grounding. "You are still you," he said quietly. "You just need someone to remind you." His words cracked something open inside me. I turned towards him, burying my face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me like I might shatter, and maybe I already had. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet understanding, a patience I did not know how to receive. He did not demand my loyalty or my choices. He simply gave me a place to fall apart safely, and in that space, in that fragile, sacred moment, I realized something painful but true. I had been loyal to a memory, not a man. The man I had married was gone, replaced by someone who no longer saw me, no longer cared. I had been fighting for a ghost, a dream, a past that could not be resurrected. Daniel was not the cause of my broken heart. He was the mirror, reflecting how broken it already was. That night, I sat in Daniel's living room until the stars blurred into morning light. He listened without judgment, without trying to fix me. And somehow in all that silence, I began to heal. I knew the path ahead would not be easy. I would have to face hard truths, make harder decisions. But for the first time in years, I felt strong enough to choose myself. Daniel kissed the top of my head, a soft, lingering gesture, and whispered against my hair, "You are not alone anymore." I clung to those words, letting them stitch up the jagged pieces of my soul. I did not have all the answers. I did not know what the future held. But I knew this. I deserved more than survival. I deserved to live. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to begin. In the days that followed, I found a strange kind of peace settling over me. It was not that everything was suddenly easy. It was just that for the first time I was no longer lying to myself. I had spent too many years trying to hold together a life that had fallen apart long ago. I spoke to my husband one evening calmly and clearly. I told him that I could not keep pretending anymore, that the distance between us was too wide to bridge, and that I needed to step away to find myself again. His response was cold, almost indifferent, and though it hurt, it also confirmed what I had already known deep down. With each small, painful step, I reclaimed pieces of myself. Daniel remained a steady presence, but he never pushed. He let me lead. Let me rediscover who I was without needing me to be anything more for him. Some nights we sat together in silence, and that silence felt more intimate than any words could have been. I did not rush into anything new. I allowed myself to heal, to grow stronger, to imagine a future where I was not invisible. And in that future, I saw the possibility of love, real love built not on obligation or guilt, but on mutual respect, tenderness, and choice. For the first time in years, my heart felt light. I was not broken. I was just finally free to begin again. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or romantic promises that saved me. It was quiet kindness, a gentle voice, a caring look, a neighbor who noticed the pain that had been dismissed in my own home for years. But here's the question that still haunts me. Was it betrayal or survival? Some people will say I crossed a line. Others will say I had already been abandoned long before that door ever opened. Because what do you do when the one person who's supposed to love you stops showing up, and someone else steps in not with desire, but with compassion? Is betrayal defined by actions or by the emotional vacancy that forces you into someone else's arms? I want to hear from you. Was I wrong to let someone in emotionally, even if it never turned physical? Or was it my husband's silence that broke the vows long before I did? Leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Follow me so I have more motivation to create powerful, vulnerable stories like this, or simply encourage me by pressing number 1. Your support keeps me going.